The alien brute laughed as he knocked the human's books to the classroom floor, mocking him. The human clenched his fists, planning a satisfying revenge. Jeremy Evans, 19-year-old freshman xenobiology major, landed on planet Zephyrus Prime to make history. Mankind was finally admitted to the Galactic Union after centuries of brutal subjugation and prejudice from spiteful aliens. He strode into his first class, full of dangerous and aggressive creatures. The professor paired them up for a rare dissection. Jeremy's large eyes went wide with curiosity, while the other students bristled with disgust. He was assigned to Thule, a hulking purple Lurian. The brute sneered. "Watch where you're going, alien." The Lurian lumbered off. Jeremy seethed with resentment, humiliated. The survival of mankind on the galactic stage depended on him excelling here. If he came back disgraced, with news he'd been laughed out by these alien creatures, it would shame all of Earth. Rage surged in his chest as Jeremy gathered up the manuals. He would not let mankind down, not with the stakes so high. He silently vowed to put the alien bully in his place and make humankind proud. Victory here would show the galaxy what badass creatures humans really were and earn his species some long-overdue respect. In the subsequent days, Thule's abuse only got worse. His attacks became more frequent, more vicious. He got off on seeing Jeremy suffer. One day in lab, while doing a routine chemical titration, Thule reached over and tipped a critical reagent into Jeremy's beaker. The mixture frothed and sizzled, releasing a cloud of toxic vapor. Red lights flashed and sirens blared as the lab was evacuated. Firefighting drones doused the flammable spill. Students fled amidst the chaos. Thule shot Jeremy an innocent "whoops, clumsy me" shrug. The next week, hours before a major exam, Jeremy logged on to review his notes only to find his homework replaced with profanity-laced insults directed at the professors. The more Jeremy tried to fix it, the more error messages popped up, mocking him. Thule had hacked his account and sabotaged his work. With no time left to redo the assignment, Jeremy was forced to turn it in as is. The xenolinguistics professor glared at him with disgust. Their shared combat training class was the worst. Thule used every exercise as an excuse to batter Jeremy, always making it look like an accident. A misaimed punch in boxing drills dislocated Jeremy's shoulder. A missed safety catch in zero-G judo left him with fractured ribs. A sweeping kick in CQC training concussed him. Each time, Thule feigned concern. I'm so sorry. I forget how fragile you humans are." The instructors looked the other way, not wanting to appear biased against the lone human. Jeremy's body ached constantly under the endless abuse, but he refused to break. He wouldn't give Thule the satisfaction. He wouldn't shame mankind by quitting. Jeremy would endure the torment and complete his training, no matter what. One night, Jeremy was studying alone, sequestered in the labyrinthine stacks of the Academy library. Lost in thought, he didn't hear Thule's approach until it was too late. Cruel hands seized him from behind, yanking him off his feet. Thule dragged Jeremy into the shadows between towering bookshelves and slammed him face first against the wall, driving the air from his lungs. He pinned the human there, one hand around his throat. "So your primitive kind don't belong here, human," Thule hissed in Jeremy's ear. "You're an embarrassment to this institution. Go back to that pathetic dirtball you crawled off of." Jeremy gasped for air, barely choking out a defiant reply. "I earned my place here, same as you." Thule snarled and squeezed Jeremy's neck harder. "You'll earn your place in the morgue if you don't disappear, little human." Darkness crept in at the edges of Jeremy's vision as he clawed at Thule's iron grip. Despite his struggles, he couldn't break free. This is it, Jeremy thought. This is how I die. Suddenly a deep, authoritative voice cut through the shadows. "Cadet Thule, release him now." The Lurian's hands sprang open at the booming command. Jeremy collapsed to the ground, hacking and wheezing as he gulped down air. He massaged his neck where Thule had strangled him. Angry red marks showed where the alien's thick fingers had crushed his throat. Admiral Zahn, the Academy's Andorian commandant, emerged from the shadows between the towering bookstacks. His blue skin looked nearly black in the dim light. but his eyes blazed with fury and his antennae quivered with barely contained rage. He seized Thule by the shoulder and wrenched him around to face him. "You stand here assaulting a fellow cadet and have the audacity to call him an embarrassment to this institution." Zahn snarled, his voice dripping with disgust. Thule opened his mouth to protest, but Zahn cut him off. "I've seen the reports, Thule. Did you really think your little accidents would escape my notice indefinitely?" Thule seemed to wither under Zahn's scorching glare. He stared down at his feet. Zahn jabbed a finger into Thule's chest, his blue skin flushing navy with anger. "Your family's wealth and influence may have let you get away with being a brute before, but no longer. You are hereby placed on academic probation. One more incident, and you will be expelled in disgrace. I will be watching you very closely." Zahn turned and helped Jeremy to his feet. The human swayed unsteadily for a moment before finding his balance. Zahn's expression softened as he faced the battered cadet. "Cadet Evans, you have my sincerest apologies for what you've endured here. I assure you this is not what the Academy stands for. Please, get yourself to the infirmary and get those injuries treated. I'll handle the rest of this reprobate's disciplinary proceedings myself." "Yes, sir, thank you, sir," Jeremy croaked, his voice hoarse. He saluted the Admiral, then turned on his heel and strode off, head held high despite the pain. After weeks of abuse, someone had finally seen Thule's cruelty for what it was. Jeremy felt a thrill of validation, even as his body ached. He made his way through the maze-like library, heading for the medical bay. Maybe now, with the Admiral himself watching Thule like a hawk, the Lurian would have no choice but to leave him be. Jeremy desperately hoped so. He'd proven he could take a beating, but he was so tired of being used as a punching bag. He wanted to focus on his studies, not constantly watch his back for the next ambush. As he walked, Jeremy reviewed Thule's threats in his head. The Lurian had seemed dead serious about his intention to kill Jeremy if he didn't quit the Academy. Would a mere slap on the wrist from the Admiral really be enough to dissuade Thule from following through? He'd already proven willing to assault Jeremy in a public space. What was to stop him from laying in wait along a deserted corridor or sneaking into the humans' dorm room one night? The more Jeremy thought about it, the more his gut twisted with unease. Thule didn't seem like the type to let a grudge go. Probation or no probation. If anything, the Admiral's public dressing down would probably just enrage the Lurian further. Jeremy had embarrassed him, and if there was one thing he'd learned about Thule, it was that the alien couldn't abide being humiliated. By the time Jeremy reached the infirmary, a plan had begun to take shape in his mind. If Thule was determined to hound him, Jeremy would just have to confront the alien directly and settle things once and for all. He wouldn't let himself be terrorized into abandoning his dream. He'd find a way to deal with Thule himself, without the Admiral's protection. Painful as it was, perhaps letting Thule beat on him these past weeks had been a blessing in disguise. Now Jeremy knew his enemy. He'd assessed Thule's style, his strengths and weaknesses, and in their hand-to-hand combat courses, Jeremy had held back, not wanting to reveal the true extent of his skills and risk ostracism for being a brutish human. Next time he faced Thule, Jeremy resolved, he wouldn't be holding anything back. He'd show that alien what a human was really capable of. A week passed, Jeremy's bruises fading to mottled greens and yellows, but the sting of Thule's brutal attack still fresh in his mind. He checked and double-checked the seals on his power armor as he suited up for their scheduled bout in the Zero-G combat simulator. Thule smirked as they entered the arena, his armor gleaming a menacing purple-black under the harsh lights. The buzzer sounded, and Thule flew at Jeremy like a meteoric cannonball, armored fists swinging. His Lurian strength, already formidable, was amplified tenfold by the hydraulic actuators of his exosuit. Jeremy ducked and spun, barely evading a haymaker that would have taken his head clean off. He darted around Thule, peppering the alien with rapid jabs targeting the armor's joints and seams. Thule roared with rage and lunged again, arms spread wide to envelop Jeremy in a crushing embrace. Jeremy seized Thule's arm and torqued his hips, using the alien's own momentum to catapult him face first into the bulkhead. The clang of metal on metal reverberated through the chamber as Thule slammed into the wall with bone-rattling force. Thule rebounded, whirling to face Jeremy. The faceplate of his helmet had cracked from the impact, and Jeremy could see the murder in his eyes. With a guttural snarl, Thule reached over his shoulder and unlimbered the mass driver cannon mounted there, leveling it at Jeremy. Thule, no, heavy weapons are prohib. Jeremy's protest was cut off as Thule opened fire, the staccato roar of the cannon drowning out all other sound. A storm of high-velocity slugs ripped through the air, perforating Jeremy's armor. Alarms shrieked in his helmet as his suit's integrity plummeted. The onslaught sent him tumbling and spinning wildly through the zero-G arena. Through the red haze of warnings flashing across his visor, Jeremy saw Thule lining up another shot. Time seemed to slow. With a last desperate plan taking shape, Jeremy slapped the quick release on his chest plate. The armor chunk flew off just as Thule fired again. The slug round struck the plate with a resounding clang and a bright flash, the transfer of momentum hurling Jeremy backward until he crashed into the far bulkhead with a grunt of pain. Jeremy coiled his legs and kicked off hard from the wall, propelling himself to meet Thule head-on. As he flew, he grabbed a sparking power cable torn free from his armor. At the last instant before impact, Jeremy jammed the live wire into the gash in Thule's armor. Electricity arced over Thule's suit as the alien went rigid, convulsing violently. After several seconds, the surge ended, and Thule went limp, insensate, drifting in a lazy spin. Jeremy collapsed back against the bulkhead, his muscles burning and his head swimming. The arena doors burst open, and a swarm of medics rushed in. As they moved to tend to the injured cadets, Admiral Zahn strode in behind them. He came to a halt, towering over Thule's unconscious form, his face stormy and his antennae aquiver with barely contained fury. "Probation violation logged," Zahn spat. "Cadet Thule, you are hereby expelled from Galactic Academy, effective immediately." He turned to Jeremy as the medics affixed a stabilizer frame to secure the battered human for transport. "Cadet Evans, you have once again displayed courage and skill far beyond what your age and experience would suggest. You do your species proud." Zahn gave Jeremy a solemn nod as the human was carried off to the infirmary. Months passed as Jeremy threw himself into his studies with a singular focus, his injuries fading to dull aches and old scars. He pored over xenobiology tomes late into the night, his bloodshot eyes scanning the pages. In the combat simulator, he pushed himself harder than ever, honing his reflexes until he could flow like water around his opponent's attacks. His professors marveled at his progress, holding up his papers as shining examples. Even his alien peers, once so quick to sneer, began to begrudgingly acknowledge his skill. But light years away, in the seedy underbelly of a lawless space station, Thule stewed in his own bitter juices. Expelled in disgrace, his once promising military career in ashes, the Lurian dreamed of nothing but revenge against the human who had ruined him. He slammed a meaty fist on the table, sloshing the viscous green liquid in his glass. "That scrawny ape cost me everything," Thule snarled to his hulking companion. "I want him dead, Crone. I want to feel his feeble little neck snap in my hands." Crone leaned back, his scarred face splitting into a razor-toothed grin. "Killing humans is expensive business, my friend. The Crimson Corsairs don't come cheap." "Money is no object. I'll burn through every last credit in my family's coffers if that's what it takes." Thule's voice dropped to a menacing growl. "Just help me destroy that wretched creature." Crone pocketed the chip with a grunt. "You got yourself a deal." On the day of the Academy's annual Intergalactic Peace Conference, Jeremy stood tall and proud among the honor guard, his dress uniform crisp and immaculate. Dignitaries from 100 worlds filed into the grand auditorium, a shimmering mosaic of skin tones and scales, feathers and fur. Jeremy scanned the crowd vigilantly, alert for any sign of trouble. Suddenly a deafening blast rocked the chamber. Jeremy was hurled off his feet as a wave of searing heat washed over him. Alarms blared and screams filled the air as the auditorium doors burst open, disgorging a swarm of heavily armed mercenaries. The Crimson Corsairs had arrived. Chaos erupted as the mercenaries opened fire indiscriminately, spraying the crowd with blaster bolts. Jeremy rolled to his feet, ears ringing, and charged toward the dignitaries. He reached the Tellarite ambassador first, the porcine alien squealing in terror. As Jeremy shoved him behind a marble pillar, blaster shots sizzled overhead as Jeremy darted from one dignitary to the next, herding them to safety with shouted commands and flying tackles. As the last of the dignitaries took cover, Jeremy snatched a fallen guard's sidearm and spun to face the attackers. He squeezed off shot after shot, dropping corsairs with grim efficiency. A flash of purple caught his eye, and Jeremy's blood ran cold. There, at the head of the mercenaries, stood Thule, his face twisted in a manic grin as he sprayed the auditorium with fiery destruction. White-hot rage surged through Jeremy's veins. He charged headlong at his nemesis, zigzagging through the hail of blaster fire. Thule spotted him and roared, leveling his rifle at the human's head. Jeremy ducked and rolled, coming up inside Thule's guard. He launched himself upward, his flying kick slamming square into Thule's chest. The Lurian crashed backward, smashing into a marble pillar with an agonized howl. Thule staggered to his feet, eyes blazing with fury. He ripped a vibroblade from his belt and slashed at Jeremy, the humming blade slicing the air. Jeremy sidestepped the blow and snapped his hand out, his knuckles cracking against Thule's jaw in a devastating uppercut. Thule's head whipped back, violet blood spraying from his split lip. The two rivals crashed together in a whirlwind of violence, fists and feet flying in a brutal ballet. Thule's blade hissed and spat, carving glowing trails through the air. Jeremy bobbed and weaved, the razor edge missing his flesh by mere centimeters. He hammered at Thule with lightning-fast strikes, the Lurian's bones crunching under his relentless assault. Thule's swings grew wild, his breath ragged. Jeremy pressed his advantage, driving the alien back with a staccato flurry of punches. A final thunderous uppercut lifted Thule clean off his feet. The Lurian crashed to the floor and lay still, unconscious. Around them the tide had turned. The Academy's security forces swarmed the remaining corsairs, the mercenaries dropping their weapons and falling to their knees. Jeremy sagged, his muscles burning, as the adrenaline slowly ebbed. A strong hand gripped his shoulder. Jeremy turned to see Admiral Zahn, the Andorian's eyes shining with pride. "Well done, Cadet Evans. You've shown the true mettle of humanity today." Jeremy stood in the center of a maelstrom of flashing cameras and shouting reporters, their questions coming at him like a hail of blaster bolts. He answered each with calm, measured responses, his voice steady and strong. "Cadet Evans, how does it feel to be hailed as a hero across the galaxy?" a green-skinned Orion journalist asked, thrusting a microphone towards him. Jeremy met her gaze, his expression serious. "I don't consider myself a hero. I simply did what needed to be done to protect innocent lives. Anyone in my position would have done the same." "But you single-handedly took down the Crimson Corsairs," a Tellarite reporter exclaimed. "Surely that deserves some recognition." Jeremy shook his head. "The credit belongs to all who stood against the Corsairs that day. My fellow cadets, the Academy security forces, the brave dignitaries who refused to be cowed by terror. It was a team effort." As the interviews continued, Jeremy steered the conversation towards the issues that mattered most to him. This attack has shown us that there are still those who seek to divide us, to pit species against each other, but we are stronger together. Only by standing united can we hope to build a lasting peace. His words struck a chord, rippling out across the galaxy. Species that had long regarded each other with suspicion and hostility began to look at one another in a new light. Tentative alliances formed, old grudges set aside in the name of cooperation. But even as Jeremy worked tirelessly to promote understanding, a shadow was gathering at the edges of civilized space. On the frozen penal colony of Rura Penthi, Thule sat in his cell, his hatred burning hotter than ever. As Thule stared at the icy walls, a figure emerged from the shadows. Crone, his old Crimson Corsair contact. The mercenary's scarred face split into a grin. "You look like you could use a change of scenery, my friend." Thule leapt to his feet, his eyes blazing. "Get me out of here, Crone. I have unfinished business with that human filth." As if on cue, a series of deafening explosions rocked the prison. Alarms blared as guards rushed to contain the sudden outbreak of violence. In the chaos, Kron slipped a pulse blaster into Thula's waiting hand. They burst from the cell, cutting down guards with ruthless efficiency. Thule reveled in the slaughter, his blood singing with each kill. As they fought their way to the landing pad where Kron's ship waited, Thule made a vow. Evans is just the beginning. I won't rest until I've exterminated his entire species from the galaxy. News of Thule's escape sent shockwaves through the Galactic Union. Disturbing reports began to filter in from the far reaches of space. Human colonies raided, ships destroyed, entire populations slaughtered. The Crimson Corsairs, once thought disbanded, had returned with a vengeance under Thule's command. As the Union dithered and debated, paralyzed by indecision, Jeremy took action. He gathered his most capable Academy friends, a crack team of warriors and strategists, the best of the best. There was Zora, the Andorian tech wizard who could hack any system. Karax, the Klingon weapons master, who'd never met a fight he couldn't win. Liara, the Asari biotic with the power to crush a tank with her mind. Raxtul, the Denobulan medic who could heal any wound, and Syl, the Tiburonian pilot who could fly through the eye of a needle. Together they set out into the lawless Outer Rim, following the trail of destruction Thule left in his wake. On a dozen worlds, they clashed with the Crimson Corsairs, each battle more brutal than the last. Jeremy and his team were outnumbered and outgunned, but they refused to back down. They fought with the courage of lions, the cunning of foxes, the tenacity of badgers. Slowly but surely, they began to turn the tide. The final confrontation came on the planet Kalshebel, amidst the crumbling ruins of an ancient alien citadel. As Jeremy's team battled the Corsairs, Jeremy and Thule faced each other once more. They dueled across the rubble-strewn courtyard, blades flashing in the crimson light of the dying sun. Thule was stronger, but Jeremy was faster. The Lurian's hate made him reckless, while the human's discipline made him precise. With a final devastating maneuver, Jeremy disarmed Thule, sending his vibroblade skittering across the flagstones. He forced the Lurian to his knees, the point of his own blade hovering a hair's breadth from Thule's throat. In that moment, Jeremy felt the full weight of every cruel act Thule had ever committed pressing down on him. His hand tightened on his sword's hilt, the urge to end the alien's miserable life almost overwhelming. But even as his rage reached a crescendo, Jeremy heard the echoes of his academy teachings whispering in his mind. Mercy, justice, the rule of law. With a supreme effort of will, he stepped back, lowering his blade. So no, I won't sink to your level, Thule. You'll face justice for your crimes, but it won't be frontier justice dispensed at the end of a sword. You'll have your day in court, before the eyes of the galaxy. Your fate will be decided by the law, not by me. Thule spat at Jeremy's feet, his face twisting with loathing. You're weak, human. You don't have the guts to do what's necessary. Jeremy met Thule's glare steadily. It's not weakness to hold to a higher standard, even in the face of monsters like you. He gestured to Karax and Zora. Restrain the prisoner. We're taking him in. In that split second of hesitation, Thule exploded into motion. He lunged forward, his broad shoulders slamming into Jeremy's chest as his hand knocked the human's blade aside. The sword clattered across the flagstones. Jeremy crashed to the ground, the breath driven from his lungs by the impact. Thule was on him in an instant, his weight pinning Jeremy down. They grappled furiously, a desperate tangle of straining limbs and heaving chests. They rolled across the rubble-strewn floor, smashing through chunks of fallen masonry. Dust billowed around them, clogging Jeremy's nose and mouth. He coughed and spat, trying to clear his airway. Thule's thick fingers clamped around Jeremy's throat, squeezing with all his alien might. Jeremy's eyes bulged as he scrabbled at Thule's iron grip, his nails gouging bloody furrows in the Lurian's purple flesh. But Thule's hold was relentless. Darkness crept in at the edges of Jeremy's vision as his lungs screamed for air. With a last surge of desperate strength, Jeremy brought his knee up sharply, driving it into Thule's groin with a sickening crunch. Thule howled in agony, his grip loosening for a precious instant. Jeremy wrenched free, gasping and choking as he sucked in a ragged breath. He scrambled across the rubble, his fingers clawing for purchase on the shattered stone. There, his blaster, half buried in the debris. Jeremy snatched it up and whirled, bringing the weapon to bear on Thule. The Lurian was charging, his eyes wild with rage and pain, a roar tearing from his throat. Jeremy fired. The plasma bolt caught Thule square in the chest, exploding out his back in a spray of seared flesh and boiling blood. The force of the blast lifted Thule off his feet, hurling him backward like a rag doll. He crashed to the ground in a crumpled heap. A smoking hole punched clean through his torso. Jeremy approached warily, his blaster trained on his fallen foe. Thule lay on his back, his chest a ruined mess of charred meat and shattered bone. To Jeremy's shock, the Lurian began to laugh, a wet, gurgling sound that bubbled up from his ruined lungs. "You think this is over, human?" Thule rasped, violet blood frothing on his lips. "You've won nothing. My death will only fan the flames of hatred against your kind. The Crimson Corsairs will live on, and they will not rest until humanity is wiped from the face of the galaxy." With a final rattling breath, Thule went limp, his eyes staring sightlessly at the smoke-stained sky. A last defiant sneer twisted his dead features. Jeremy stood over Thule's corpse, his chest heaving, his blaster hanging loose at his side. The weight of the alien's dying words sank in like lead weights around his neck. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a much larger war. With grim determination, Jeremy turned away from Thule's body. He picked his way through the ruins to where his team waited, battered but alive. They had to get back to the academy. The fight ahead would be long and bloody, but Jeremy was ready to face it head-on. He was a representative of Earth, and he would not rest until humanity had proven its rightful place among the stars. A pall of smoke hung over the academy as Jeremy's battered ship limped into dock. The once pristine halls bore scars from the Crimson Corsairs' relentless raids, scorch marks from blaster fire, jagged holes from breaching charges. Grim-faced security personnel rushed to and fro, tending to the wounded and shoring up defenses. No sooner had Jeremy stepped off his ship than an aide hurried up to him, her face pinched with urgency. "Cadet Evans, you're needed in the council chamber immediately. The Galactic Council is convening an emergency session." Jeremy nodded curtly and followed the aide through the war-torn corridors. As they walked, she filled him in on the situation. The Crimson Corsairs have been escalating their attacks on human colonies. The death toll is mounting, and the Council is deadlocked on how to respond. Jeremy's jaw tightened. Thule's vengeful words echoed in his mind. He had known this fight was far from over, but the scale of the Corsairs' violence still shocked him. The counselor from Andoria, an icy world of methane seas, was speaking, his voice reedy and thin. "Must pursue a diplomatic solution. Further violence will only beget more violence. We should open negotiations with these Corsairs, find out what they want." Admiral Zahn slammed a blue fist on the table, his antennae quivering with rage. "What they want is the extermination of humanity. You cannot negotiate with fanatics. The only language they understand is force. We must strike back hard and fast, crush them before they can do more harm." The chamber erupted into a cacophony of arguing voices, each representative trying to shout down the others. Jeremy sat quietly, his mind racing. He had seen firsthand the brutality of the Corsairs. He knew Zahn was right. They would never be satisfied until humanity was wiped from the stars. Suddenly a deafening boom shook the chamber. The far wall exploded inward, spraying the room with rubble and dust. Crimson-clad figures poured through the breach, laser rifles spitting searing bolts of energy. The Crimson Corsairs had come to the heart of the Galactic Union. Counselors screamed and dove for cover as the attackers raked the room with fire. Jeremy's team reacted instantly, overturning the heavy table to form a barricade. They returned fire, energy weapons humming as they sent a barrage of shots toward the Corsairs. The chamber devolved into a maelstrom of whining energy bolts and crackling explosions. The stench of ozone and charred flesh filled the air. Jeremy ducked and wove, his rifle bucking in his hands as he picked off corsairs one by one. Through the swirling smoke, a familiar figure caught Jeremy's eye. Scaros, Thul's vicious second-in-command, was advancing on the Earth Councillor, an elderly woman with a kind face. She cowered behind a shattered piece of the table, her eyes wide with terror. Scaros leveled his rifle at her, a cruel sneer twisting his reptilian features. Jeremy leapt from cover with a roar of pure fury and charged across the chamber. He slammed into Scaros just as the reptilian fired, the shot going wide and searing a hole in the wall. They crashed to the ground in a tangle of thrashing limbs, Jeremy grappling for control of Scaros's rifle. The reptilian snarled, his fetid breath hot on Jeremy's face. "First you, then your pathetic counselor, then all of humanity." Jeremy strained against Scaros's incredible strength, his muscles screaming. He ground out a defiant reply through gritted teeth. "Not on my watch, you overgrown gecko." With a mighty heave, Jeremy wrenched the rifle from Scaros's grasp. He reared back and brought the butt of the weapon down on the reptilian's skull with a sickening crunch. Scaros's eyes rolled back in his head, and he went limp, collapsing in a heap. Around them, the tide of battle was turning. Inspired by Jeremy's valiant stand, the Council's security forces rallied. They surged forward, driving the corsairs back with a withering hail of blaster fire. The attackers broke and fled, scrambling back through the breach they had blown in the wall. As the last of the corsairs was subdued, a ragged cheer went up from the battered councillors. The Earth representative, her hair dishevelled and her robe singed, rushed to Jeremy and embraced him fiercely. "You've saved us all, my boy," she said, her eyes shining with pride. "Earth and humanity could not ask for a finer representative." Jeremy returned her embrace, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The attack had been repelled, but he knew this was only the beginning. The Crimson Corsairs would not rest until humanity was destroyed. And he would not rest until they were stopped, once and for all. In the smouldering ruins of the Galactic Council chambers, emergency crews worked frantically to free the wounded from the rubble. The dead lay in rows, their faces covered by whatever scrap of fabric could be found. The air reeked of smoke, blood, and despair. Jeremy stood amidst the destruction, his fists clenched, his heart heavy. They had repelled the attack, but at a terrible cost. So many lives lost, so much damage done. And for what? The hatred and fear that had driven the Crimson Corsairs seemed only to have grown stronger. As he helped a limping Tellarite councillor to a waiting medic, Jeremy's attention was drawn to a growing commotion near the ruined entrance. A tall, slender figure strode through the dust and debris, his deep purple robes immaculate, despite the surrounding chaos. Jeremy recognized him instantly, Zoor, the Argelian politician who had long been one of the loudest voices against humanity's inclusion in the galactic community. Zoor surveyed the destruction with a look of grim satisfaction. He climbed atop a pile of rubble, his voice amplified by a hovering drone. "Behold the work of humanity," he declared, his words ringing out across the devastation. "Look upon the ruin they have brought to the very heart of our great union." Jeremy started forward, anger surging in his veins, but a hand on his arm held him back. It was Admiral Zahn, his face grim. "Not now," the Andorian muttered. "There will be a time to confront him, but this is not it." In the days that followed, Zoor's message spread like wildfire across the galaxy. In every newscast on every planet, his face appeared, his accusations against humanity growing more strident with each appearance. "The humans are a plague upon the galaxy," he declared, his eyes flashing with fervor. "They are a violent, unpredictable species, unfit to walk among civilized beings. It is time, no, it is past time, for us to expel them from our union, to ban them from our institutions, to quarantine their contagion before it spreads further." Jeremy and his allies fought back the only way they could, with words. They spoke out in interviews, in public forums, in every venue they could find. They pointed to the countless contributions humanity had made to the galactic community, the discoveries shared, the alliances forged, the lives saved. But their voices seemed lost in the rising tide of anti-human sentiment. In the halls of the Galactic Council, once staunch allies began to distance themselves. Proposals for sanctions against Earth, for restrictions on human travel and trade, gained traction. Even Admiral Zahn, Jeremy's most powerful advocate, found himself increasingly isolated. Frustration and desperation mounting, Jeremy made a decision. If he couldn't turn the tide of public opinion through reason and diplomacy, he would confront the source directly. He sent a public message to Zoar, challenging him to a live debate, broadcast across the galaxy. To Jeremy's surprise, Zoar accepted immediately, his message oozing with confidence. "I look forward to enlightening the galaxy about the true nature of humanity," he said with a smirk. And so, on a stage set against the backdrop of the stars, Jeremy faced his accuser. Zoar, resplendent in his deep purple robes, seemed to exude an aura of calm assurance. Jeremy, in the simple grey uniform of a Galactic Academy cadet, looked almost plain by comparison. But when he spoke, Jeremy's words blazed with conviction. He spoke of the bravery of his fellow humans, of their tireless curiosity, their boundless compassion. He invoked the names of the human scientists who had cured the Andorian plague, the human diplomats who had negotiated peace between the Klingons and the Romulans, the human explorers who had charted new worlds and expanded the reach of the Union. Zoar countered with a litany of human faults, real and imagined. He painted a picture of a species driven by ego and ambition, heedless of the consequences of their actions. He pointed to the attack on the Council as proof of humanity's inherent violence. Back and forth they argued, point and counterpoint, rhetoric clashing like swords. The debate stretched on for hours, the galaxy hanging on every word. But in the end, there was no clear victor. The viewers, their minds clouded by long-held prejudices and fresh fears, saw what they wanted to see. As the debate concluded, and the cameras powered down, Zoar approached Jeremy, his expression smug. He leaned in close, his voice a low, venomous hiss. "This isn't over, human. I will see your kind driven from the stars one way or another." Jeremy met Zoar's gaze unflinchingly, his jaw set. "Bring it on, Zoar. Earth doesn't run from a fight." The Argelian's eyes narrowed. "Oh, I'm counting on that." He turned and strode away, his robe swirling behind him. Jeremy watched him go, a sense of foreboding settling in his gut. He knew that this was only the beginning of a long and bitter struggle, but he also knew that he, and all of humanity, would not shy away from it. They would fight for their place among the stars, no matter the cost. He turned to face the stars, their light cold and distant. Somewhere out there, the remnants of the Crimson Corsairs were plotting their next move, and in the halls of power across the galaxy, humanity's fate was being decided by those who had never even set foot on Earth. The road ahead would be hard, and the cost would be high. But Jeremy had never been one to back down from a challenge. He would face whatever came, for the sake of his species, his planet, and all those who looked to him as a symbol of human resilience. He took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. There was work to be done. In the days following the debate, the galaxy held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The uneasy silence was shattered by a series of shocking announcements from the Galactic Council. Zoar, using his considerable influence and political cunning, had pushed through a resolution calling for sweeping economic sanctions against Earth. Human-owned businesses across the galaxy found their assets frozen, their licenses revoked. Human citizens living on alien worlds were suddenly treated as pariahs, their visas cancelled, their movements restricted. Protests erupted on Earth and her colonies as the news spread. The sanctions were a clear violation of the trade agreements and treaties that had been so painstakingly negotiated when humanity first joined the Galactic Union. Earth's leaders, faced with economic ruin and the prospect of their citizens being stranded on hostile worlds, issued an ultimatum. If the sanctions were not lifted immediately, Earth would have no choice but to withdraw from the Galactic Union altogether. The threat sent shockwaves through the galaxy. The loss of Earth, one of the Union's most prosperous and influential members, could destabilize the entire alliance. As tensions mounted and fleets mobilized, Jeremy paced the halls of the academy, his mind racing. He knew Zoar was behind this, but how could he prove it? As if in answer to his unspoken question, Jeremy's comm unit chimed with an incoming message from an unknown sender. Frowning, he opened the file. His eyes widened as he scanned the contents. It was a trove of encrypted communications between Zoar and the Crimson Corsairs, detailing their plan to stage the attacks and frame humanity. With mounting excitement, Jeremy realized he was holding the evidence that could expose Zoar's treachery and clear Earth's name. Jeremy raced to Admiral Zahn's office, bursting in without knocking. The Andorian looked up, startled, as Jeremy slapped the datapad down on his desk. "Sir, you need to see this. Zoar's behind everything, the attacks, the sanctions, all of it. He's been manipulating the Council to turn them against us." Zahn's antennae quivered as he read the damning messages, his face darkening with each revelation. When he finished, he looked up at Jeremy, his eyes hard. "This is explosive. If we can verify these logs, we can bring Zoar down and get the sanctions lifted. But we need to move carefully. If Zoar catches wind of what we're doing, he'll bury the evidence and paint us as the aggressors." Jeremy nodded, his jaw set. "What's our play, sir?" Zahn leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "We launch a covert operation, a small team off the books to infiltrate Zoar's inner circle and secure hard proof of his guilt. Once we have that, we can—" The Admiral's words were cut off by a deafening boom that shook the building to its foundations. Alarms blared as Jeremy and Zahn raced to the window. What they saw made their blood run cold. Dropships bearing the Crimson Corsair insignia were descending on the Academy grounds, disgorging heavily armed troops. Explosions and energy weapons fire erupted across the campus as the attackers stormed the buildings. Zahn slammed his fist on the comm panel. "This is Admiral Zahn to all security personnel. We are under attack. Code red. I repeat, code—" The signal cut to static as another explosion rocked the building. The power flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness. Emergency lighting bathed the scene in an eerie red glow as Jeremy and Zahn drew their sidearms. A harsh voice crackled over the Academy's intercom system. "Attention all students and faculty. This is Zoar of the Galactic Council. As of this moment, the Academy is under my control." Jeremy's grip tightened on his blaster as Zoar's words echoed through the halls. "Earth has proven itself a threat to galactic peace, and its spawn have infected the very heart of our society. No longer, I am here to excise this human cancer from our midst." There was a pause, then Zoar's voice returned, dripping with malice. "To the human filth infesting this once great institution, you have 1 hour to surrender yourselves to my forces. For every minute you delay, one of your classmates will be executed. Their blood will be on your hands." Jeremy turned to Zahn, his face grim. "He's taken the Academy hostage. We have to stop him." Jeremy was already moving, his mind racing. "I know just who to call." Minutes later, Jeremy stood before a hastily assembled group of his most trusted friends and allies. There was Zora, her blue Andorian skin flushed with anger as she checked the charge on her plasma rifle. Carax, the burly Klingon, was sharpening his bat'leth, the curved blade gleaming in the dim light. Liara, the Asari biotic, stood in quiet meditation, wisps of blue energy coruscating around her lithe form. Raxtul, the Denobulan medic, was methodically laying out his trauma kit, his face a mask of concentration. And Syl, the wiry Tiburonian pilot, was studying a holo map of the Academy, her tail twitching as she plotted infiltration routes. Jeremy looked at each of them in turn, his heart swelling with gratitude and pride. These were more than just his classmates. They were his comrades in arms, his friends. They had stood by him through every trial and hardship the Academy had thrown at him, and he knew they would stand with him now, even in the face of impossible odds. "So you all know what's at stake," Jeremy said, his voice steady despite the knot of fear in his gut. "Zoar has taken our home, our friends. He wants to break us, to make an example of us, to show the galaxy that humanity has no place here." He paused, letting his words sink in. But we're going to show him and everyone else what humans are made of. We're going to take back our academy, rescue our people, and bring that bastard to justice." Karax grunted his approval, slamming his fist against his chest in a Klingon salute. "Quapla, today is a good day to fight." The others murmured their assent, their faces set with determination. Jeremy nodded, shouldering his pulse rifle. "All right, here's the plan." Minutes later, explosions rocked the Academy's perimeter as Jeremy's team breached the defenses. They moved like phantoms through the smoke and chaos, Syl guiding them through maintenance tunnels and access shafts, avoiding the bulk of Zoor's forces. As they neared the central atrium where Zoor had set up his command post, the resistance intensified. Crimson Corsairs popped out from behind every corner and doorway, filling the air with deadly blaster fire. But Jeremy and his team were ready. Ezora and Karax laid down a withering, suppressing fire, their weapons spitting streams of searing plasma. Liara reached out with her biotics, creating shimmering barriers to absorb the incoming shots, while hurling attackers through the air like rag dolls. Raxtal darted from cover to cover, dragging the wounded to safety and patching them up with quick, sure movements. And at the head of the formation, Jeremy advanced like an unstoppable force, his pulse rifle bucking in his hands as he cut down Corsairs left and right. His face was a grim mask of determination, his eyes blazing with an inner fire. At last they burst into the atrium, a vast open space ringed with towering columns. And there, in the center of the room, stood Zoor, his purple robe swirling around him. A group of terrified students and faculty huddled nearby, guarded by a contingent of elite Corsair warriors. "Ah, the human hero arrives," Zoor sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "I must admit I'm impressed you made it this far. You humans are like cockroaches, aren't you? Hard to stamp out." Jeremy leveled his rifle at Zoor, his finger tightening on the trigger. "It's over, Zoor. Surrender now and I might let you live to stand trial for your crimes." Zoor threw back his head and laughed, a cold, mirthless sound. "Surrender to you? I think not." With a flourish, he drew a slender cylinder from his robes. With a snap hiss, a blade of pure energy extended from the hilt, casting a sickly purple glow over Zoor's sneering face. "I had hoped to savor your defeat, human, to watch you grovel and beg before I snuffed out your miserable life, but it seems you insist on doing this the hard way." Zoor twirled his energy blade in a mocking salute. "So be it. Let us end this here and now in single combat as the warriors of old. If you have the courage, that is." With a deep breath, Jeremy lowered his rifle and stepped forward, unclipping the hilt of his own energy blade from his belt. The weapon had been a gift from Admiral Zahn, presented to him on his first day at the Academy. He had trained with it every day since, honing his skills until the blade felt like an extension of his arm. "Jeremy, no!" Liara cried, starting forward. But Karax held her back, his eyes never leaving Jeremy. "This is his fight," the Klingon rumbled. "His rite of passage. We cannot interfere." Jeremy ignited his blade, a beam of shimmering blue light bursting forth. He raised it in a salute to Zoor, then dropped into a ready stance. "For Earth," he said softly, "for humanity." Zoor's face twisted into a snarl. "For a galaxy cleansed of your filth," he spat. And with that, the two combatants leapt at each other, their blades clashing in a blinding flare of light. They dueled across the atrium, their energy swords humming and sparking as they clashed again and again. Zoor was fast, his blade a purple blur as he pressed the attack. But Jeremy was faster, his reflexes honed by years of training under Earth's best swordmasters. He parried Zoor's strikes, his own blade flashing in a dizzying pattern of thrusts and slashes. The air sizzled with the smell of ozone as their weapons clashed, the heat of their plasma containment fields searing Jeremy's skin. He punctuated each question with a vicious slash, driving Jeremy back step by step. "Your kind are nothing but upstarts, primitives playing at being civilized. You bring chaos and disorder wherever you go." Jeremy gritted his teeth, weathering the storm of Zoor's attacks. He could feel his muscles burning with fatigue, his breath coming in ragged gasps. But he refused to yield, refused to give Zoor the satisfaction. You're wrong, Jeremy panted, locking blades with Zoar in a shower of sparks. Humanity's place is out here, among the stars. We've earned it, through blood and sweat and sacrifice. He shoved Zoar back, going on the offensive with a flurry of precise strikes. Diversity is our strength, not our weakness. It's only those like you, blinded by fear and hate, who can't see it. He beat Jeremy's blade aside, lashing out with a kick that caught the human in the chest. Jeremy flew backwards, crashing into a stone pillar with a grunt of pain. Zoar advanced, his eyes gleaming with madness. Today I put an end to the human plague once and for all. Today I usher in a new era of purity for the galaxy. Ignoring the pain lancing through his body, Jeremy surged upwards, driving his energy blade straight at Zoar's heart. The Argelian's eyes widened in shock as the shimmering beam punched through his chest, emerging from his back in a spray of violet blood. Zoar staggered back, his sword falling from nerveless fingers. He looked down at the gaping hole in his chest, then up at Jeremy, disbelief etched on his face. "It's impossible," he gurgled, dark blood bubbling from his lips. "Defeated by a human!" He crumpled to the ground, his life ebbing away in a spreading pool of purple. Jeremy stood over him, his own blade still humming in his hand, his face a mix of triumph and sorrow. "It didn't have to be this way," he said softly. "We could have found a way to coexist, to build a better future together." Zoar coughed, his breath rattling in his ruined chest. With his last ounce of strength he glared up at Jeremy, his eyes filled with undying hatred. "Coexist with humans?" he rasped. "Never. My only regret is that I won't live to see your kind burned from the stars." In the stunned silence that followed, Jeremy deactivated his blade, the blue light winking out with a soft hiss. Around him the hostages erupted into cheers, surging forward to embrace their saviors. Jeremy's team gathered around him, their faces alight with relief and pride. Zora clapped him on the shoulder, her antennae quivering with emotion. Carax pounded his fist against his chest, a Klingon's salute of respect. Liara embraced him, tears shining in her eyes. Raxtul busied himself with treating Jeremy's wounds, muttering about the foolishness of humans, and Syl grinned at him, her tail swishing with satisfaction. "You did it, Jer," she said, punching him lightly on the arm. "You saved the day just like a true hero." Jeremy shook his head, wincing as Raxtul applied a healing salve to his bruised ribs. "We all did it," he said firmly. "I couldn't have done any of this without you guys." In the days that followed, the truth of Zoar's deception came to light. The encrypted files Jeremy had received were verified and released to the public, revealing the depths of the Argelian's treachery. The Galactic Council, faced with incontrovertible evidence of Zoar's crimes, had no choice but to rescind the sanctions against Earth and issue a formal apology. Promises were made, resolutions passed, vowing to work towards greater understanding and cooperation between all species. But as Jeremy stood among the shattered remnants of the Academy, watching the reconstruction crews at work, he knew that the scars of the conflict would take much longer to heal. Zoar's hatred, Thul's rage, these were not isolated incidents, but symptoms of a deeper malady that afflicted the galaxy. Fear, prejudice, the insidious belief that difference equated to inferiority, that diversity was a weakness rather than a strength. These were the true enemies, the real threats to peace and progress. It would be a long and difficult road, fraught with challenges and setbacks, but Jeremy knew that he and all of humanity would walk it with their heads held high. They would face whatever trials lay ahead with the same courage, determination, and indomitable spirit that had carried them this far. For they were human, and they would never ever give up. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.